The forgotten 1980s wall insulation trick that locked heat in and kept the cold out. If you grew up in an older house, you probably remember those icy winters where the walls felt like they were shaking with cold. But hidden in that era was a clever little hack from the 1980s that quietly saved families a ton of money. It wasn't high-tech. It wasn't glamorous. But it worked so well that people who used it still swear by it today. And the best part? It's a survival-minded trick that fits perfectly with the legacy of survival spirit. Simple, reliable and effective, even when everything else fails. So let's dive straight into the good stuff. The simple method that made thin walls feel twice as warm. By the 1980s, many households were battling heat loss from walls that just weren't built for efficiency. Instead of ripping everything apart or spending on expensive renovations, a smart workaround started spreading, filling wall cavities with dense, blown-in insulation material. Usually it was cellulose, a treated, fire-resistant recycled fibre that packed tightly into every corner. When installers drilled small holes into the wall and pumped this material into the cavities, something remarkable happened. Drafts stopped. Heat stayed put. Cold air no longer slipped through. This wasn't just about adding insulation. It was about density. Cellulose didn't leave empty spaces the way older fiberglass bats did. It hugged every crack and wrapped around wiring, pipes and awkward framing gaps. In winter, that meant a cosier house. In summer, a cooler one. The 1980s were the decade where homeowners discovered that tight packing made all the difference. Why this 1980s technique worked so shockingly well? Many homes built earlier were basically hollow shells. Wind could whistle right through the wall cavity, stealing warmth before it ever reached the living room. The blown-in approach stopped this in its tracks. Once the material settled, it acted like a thermal shield. Heat no longer leaked out through the path of least resistance because there was no path left. Every square inch became a barrier. Another bonus, soundproofing. People noticed that their homes weren't just warmer, they were quieter. Cars, barking dogs and hammering rain sounded distant. The material absorbed sound waves the same way it trapped heat. And unlike fiberglass, cellulose didn't sag much when packed correctly. It stayed firm, it stayed reliable, and it kept working decade after decade, making it one of the most durable thermal upgrades of that era. One of the biggest problems with old houses is not just losing heat, it's the cold air sneaking inside. The 1980s trick tackled that too. Because the insulation filled every available pocket, it blocked cold infiltration. Walls that once felt like refrigerators suddenly felt solid. People described their homes as sealed, even though no fancy sealing tech had been used. Imagine placing a dense winter coat between you and the wind. That's essentially what these homes gained. And here's something not everyone realizes. Air infiltration can steal as much energy as poor insulation. The 1980s technique accidentally solved both problems at once. This wasn't some modern corporate fix. It was old-school resourcefulness. The kind of solution you'd expect from people who grew up hearing stories of World War II rationing, making do with what you had, and squeezing every ounce of efficiency out of simple materials. Blown-in insulation used recycled fibres. It was cheap, fast, and it could turn a drafty home into a fortress in a single afternoon. It's the kind of trick you'd want in your back pocket if you were living through a harsh winter with limited fuel. Or if you needed to stretch every bit of warmth without relying on high-powered systems or constant energy use. It had real survival value then, and it still does now. Most homeowners didn't expect miracles. They were hoping for a little comfort. But many ended up saving 20 to 40% on heating bills. Walls that once froze now held heat like a thick log cabin. Even the corners, usually the coldest part of a room, became manageable. People who had spent years battling dampness and chill suddenly found their homes feeling stable and dry. And because the process didn't require opening the walls, it became one of the most popular energy upgrades of the decade. Quick job, low mess, big payoff. Cellulose is made of plant fibers. That means it naturally slows heat movement. But here's what gave it an advantage. It trapped air inside tiny fibers, creating millions of microscopic pockets. Those pockets acted like roadblocks for heat trying to escape and barriers for cold trying to get in. Think of it as a maze that air molecules struggle to navigate. The 1980s installers didn't always know the science behind it. They just saw that it worked. And the more tightly it was blown in, the more incredible the effect became. Long before modern energy-saving campaigns, the 1980s insulation trick was already helping families rely less on heating systems. When heat stays where it's supposed to, your furnace doesn't have to work as hard. That meant fewer breakdowns, fewer fuel refills, and more control over comfort no matter what was happening outside. Folks dealing with cold snaps, storms, or power outages found their homes stayed warm longer. Not because of luck, but because those walls were holding on to every bit of heat with stubborn determination. The 1980s might feel far away, but the problem hasn't changed. Plenty of people are still living in homes with weak insulation. Plenty are still losing heat through walls that look solid but leak like sieves. And plenty are looking for survival-minded upgrades that don't depend on modern systems. This technique is just as useful now as it was then. A home with dense walls becomes more comfortable, cheaper to heat, and better protected from harsh cold. It's one of the rare upgrades that pays for itself and keeps paying. Anyone curious about boosting their home's resilience should take a page from the 1980s playbook. If you want a house that holds warmth during outages, stays cool during heat waves, and keeps drafts from creeping in, this old-school method delivers. You don't need futuristic materials. You don't need expensive renovations. You just need density, coverage and consistency, exactly what Blue-In Cellulose provides. If this kind of forgotten survival wisdom fires you up, make sure you subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who loves history, resilience and smart old-world solutions. Legacy of Survival is all about knowledge that keeps you ready, prepared, and one step ahead.